In the next part of this modeling tutorial, we're going to take a look at this component, sort of the center of the model. And this has a challenging area. We're going to return to the use of subdivision surfaces because it's really ideal at taking and merging these two different topologies, even though it can be a bit of a challenge to figure that out. We need to start off with the start file. We need to extract geometry from the geometry we've already created using the direct polygon modeling approach, and we're going to adapt some of it for subdivision purposes. The resolution is too high here. We're going to end up merging a lower resolution piece of geometry here, and we need to sort of generally match them up in that sense. Let's come over here and turn this side off. We don't need that. And in edit mode, I'm going to select this perimeter, Shift and D, press the Y key, and we'll pull that out. But then we're going to use these flat areas all the way down to the center point, because I did put a loop here that is directly in half. So we're just going to go to the halfway point since we can use symmetry. But we need to remember that we have a boundary loop that comes here and a boundary loop that comes here, and the curvature doesn't start until this edge down. So I'm going to hold the Shift key and make sure that I'm selecting that. Press Shift and D, escape, and then press the P key to separate that to become its own object. Now we're going to do the same thing over here in edge mode. I will select that, press the P key, and separate that also to become its own selection. Press the Tab key to leave edit mode. We're going to take both of these components and move out to the main scene collection, and then we're going to turn off the face plate. So let's come back in and sort of rename these. I'm going to rename this to be just center, and this I'm going to rename to be profile, so it's clear in the outliner what it is that we're doing. So with this one selected, let's come in and remove these extra loops that we don't really need for this purpose. We're going to put in new loops that we need for what we're going to be doing, but we don't want to start with those. We just want to have the basic planar geometry as our starting point. At this point, to make it easier to differentiate this profile curve from what we're modeling, let's come over and let's change the wire color to random so that we can really differentiate the two that we have going on here. And then we're going to select those two edges, but we're going to switch over into vertex mode. And having the vertices available to us visually is really going to help with this process. If we switch over into the front view, then those vertices will help us define the resolution quite a bit. We don't have the bridge loops function available to us when we're in vertex mode, but it is available up here under the edge menu. So we're just going to do bridge edge loops, and then we need to start customizing it. So the first thing that we want to do is put the number of cuts in. Let's just start with 8. But one thing that we want to be cognizant of is the fact that we can perform a symmetry operation because we're going to be doing some manual work up here, and it would really be good to have a point in the middle. So for instance, if we did 9, well, that would be ideal to have a symmetry point in the middle. We may want to increase the resolution, but let's take a look at that in a minute. But we need to change this from blend path to blend surface in order to get that curvature in place. Let's come in now to the smoothness, and let's increase this up a little bit. Let's do 0.6, and I think that'll work pretty well. So one thing that we want to do is get the vertices on the outside, and we want to get the edge close to the profile. And I think maybe we should bring it down a little, 0.595. And I think that works pretty well. Again, point on top and the center almost touching the line is kind of how we want to define that. Now, we've got a problem here because now we've got the point almost on the line, and we've got the edge, the center below the line. So we're going to have to do some manual work here. Because this blue line was modeled with a perfect 90-degree arc of a circle, we need to go to a little bit of extra work to get that to happen. But with the subdivision, but I think we need to increase maybe the resolution just a little bit. Let's just put 2 more edges in there. So let's go to 11. That gives us just a little bit more resolution over here to work with. So I think that's good. So just click to commit that. And then we're going to come in and add a subdivision modifier so that we can look at this. So let's do subdivision here. Let's increase its resolution to 3, so it's pretty high. You can see it's a little bit hard to see, but it's close enough that that should work pretty well. But it's really up over here. You can see that color, it's not matching at all. And in fact, because it's subdivided, it's going way into the long flat area because we don't have another edge till way over here. Okay, in fact, we don't even see it. In fact, maybe I don't even have one anymore. Yeah, I've got one way over here. So the subdivision mechanism is producing that curvature into the straight areas, and we want to resolve that. So let's press the K key, and I'm going to click about right here. Come down, make sure you press C so it goes all the way through. Click and then hit return, and you can see how that affects this area. So now we just have a little bit more work to do. We want to remember where the symmetry point is. So I will zoom back out because the more points you get, the more difficult it can be to kind of figure that out. I will select these original points, and the pivot is set to go to the bounding box, and that's actually useful for us. I can use that to indicate where the center is. I will select a single vertex there, do cursor to selected, then I'm going to leave edit mode just temporarily, Shift A. We're going to add an empty there, which is just going to be sort of an indicator for where we're going to have a symmetry point. It's just there to kind of help us along the way. So let's come back into edit mode, tab key, and we've got subdivision turned on, and we're starting to get a lot of overlapping elements. We've got the cage, we've got the subdivided mesh, and we've got the original profile. So I'm going to come over and click the on cage function just to sort of turn that off for a minute. And now I can marquee around vertices and I can move them. Now, if you remember, we're not in X-ray mode. And so when you do a marquee selection on something, it won't get the overlapped elements. So you got to keep that in the back of your mind. Press Option Z and see, then I can select that and move both points. But I think it would actually be even more useful. Let's pull this back and take a look at this for a minute. If you're not used to subdivision surfaces, this can be a little bit confusing. We had put a cut in right there, but when I turned off, or when I enabled this on cage function, you see there's an edge there, but we also have an edge there. So this allows us to edit the mesh directly, the subdivided mesh directly. And this is suddenly way over there. So what's going on? Well, because it's being subdivided and there's not another edge until way over here, the subdivision is blending across that surface. And I would really like this original edge to be right there. This is a boundary polygon, and it needs to stay right there so that we don't have any curve influence coming past that. So press the 2 key, and then just come up here, press the N key if this isn't available, and then come down to crease and just type in a value of 1, and that snaps that in. So we don't get any subdivision going past that. In fact, if we turn off optimal display, we can see that. The subdivision just terminates right there. So that's really, really useful. So now when we come back in, let's zoom back in here. Let's go back into the on cage mode. I'm going to come back into vertex. I think it would actually be useful if we add a little bit more geometry right here. So I'll press the K key and just drop that right there. Remembering to press C, we don't see anything visual, but it allows it to slice all the way through like it's in X-ray mode. Okay, and then we put that in. Now we can just pull those up, and we can do just a little bit of editing to get that curvature matched up just a hair more. It's a small detail, but I think that works pretty well just in terms of getting the two. You can see they're fighting, the blue and the black. That means I'm very, very close in terms of my subdivision and the original direct curve that we modeled. Now we're ready to do symmetry because we've done some real fine-tuning work up there, and we don't want to have to do that again down here on the bottom. Let's come down here. We have all of this past this symmetry point that we don't need. We're going to throw that out. Let's come over here and turn subdivision off temporarily. I'm going to turn the on-cage function off so we can just come in. I'm in select box, so I can just marquee down, select those, and then press the X key to delete those faces. And then we just come over and we add a modifier. So let's come in and do a mirror, and it's going to use just the default settings. I'm going to move that up to the top. Let's look at this in the front view. This marker that we've put in, we haven't named it. It's temporary geometry. I'm not going to worry about naming it, but we're going to use that as our mirror reference. Object mode, select this, and we just need to rotate it down. Press the R key, and then we can begin rotating that. Hold the control key, and then we can snap so that we can get directly to a 45-degree segment. And there we have that work replicated for us. We don't have to bother trying to do that. I was being very fastidious, right? And so now we don't need to worry about doing that down there. So let's come back over to our main object. Let's apply that. And then, in fact, we don't even need that anymore. We'll delete that. We need to do the same thing top to bottom because we've got curvature down here and we don't have a symmetry point that I've saved. So in the profile, the reference profile, tab key, one key goes into vertex mode, select that edge and then do cursor to selected. Tab key leaves edit mode, shift A, and then we'll just add another empty right there. So here, tab key takes us back into edit mode. Let's remove that bottom polygon. So X key, remove that face, and then we'll move this up. So G key, and then along the Z axis, press the B key so that we can just snap to that reference point right there. Okay, tab key, and then we just need to come in and let's add another modifier. So we'll do mirror, and then we need to again reference this object. So it's the Z axis that we need. So let's come over here and click Z, and there we go. Okay, so now let's go ahead and apply that. These Okay, so now we've gotten this geometry ready, and now we just need to get the width set correctly and the position set correctly. Let's come in and reset the object's origin, which we can see is off over there. So I'm going to do an object origin to geometry. Then when we look at this in the top view, we can just come over here along the Y axis and set that to 0. Let's turn back on the face plates geometry. Tab key takes us into edit mode. A key. Now the pivot is way over here, so let's just kind of move that so that we can see it. S key, and then tap Y. We can scale that. Let's come in and add one loop down the middle, and then let's go ahead and hide the face plates. We don't need those anymore. We don't need this profile anymore. So let's go ahead and turn that off. Let's do this. Let's come in, take a look at this from the left or the right side, and let's zoom down. Now, I've already got this geometry in place that's going to function for what it is that we're doing in terms of the eyepiece that comes out, but its resolution right now is kind of arbitrary, and we're going to end up changing it. In fact, let me come in here and do a set origin to geometry so it's in the middle. So this is just a reference point that I already have set up. When we blend it together, we need to have another circle that comes around that imprints into this geometry that's going to form the blending zone between the shaft of the eyepiece and this body. And that's what we need to put in place. So Shift S, cursor to selected, and then let's add another piece of geometry. So Shift A, And we're going to come up to mesh and we're going to put a circle in, view, and let's do 0.5. And for this is only going to be a reference. So I'm going to make it pretty high just so that it looks very curvy. And then I'm going to take it and I'm not going to match it. I'm going to exceed just a little bit the size. My eye is basically looking kind of at this area. I'm kind of looking for a loop right there to sort of match up that top area. Let's come in back into edit mode, polygon edit mode for the main center piece of geometry. And let's add a loop on either side. In fact, let's do this. I'm just going to add it like that. And then I'm going to select both of those. Period key, make sure I'm in bounding box geometry. S and then Y. And I want to scale those out about like that. Okay, next thing that we're going to do is we're going to focus on just this left side. Press the K key and let's start right up here. And we're generally going to trace the path of that green circle. And then down here, all I'm going to do is come over and I'm going to click basically to the bottom. You see, I'm going on the outside just slightly. And we didn't have any loops down here, which is okay. Let's go ahead and select this edge, press the 2 key and go into edge mode, bring up the context menu, and then we're going to subdivide. Let's do 6. I think that'll work pretty well. And let's go into vertex mode. It's easier to see these with vertices. Select these and just kind of move them down. We don't need to be super precise about this. This is going to be the very edge of the blending zone, and we have some freedom where we don't have to do anything in a super precise way, but that's going to be good enough, I think. Okay, now this area right here, we do want to make an adjustment to, and so and then this area right here, the resolution is too coarse at that location. So let's come back up to the top. Let's zoom in here, press the K key. This K key is super handy. Hold the shift, it'll go right to the center. Click once, and then come right to about there, and then press Z and the C key and click to put in that new loop. And then here, we just want to move this up so it roughly continues that curvature. Now it's got topology. You can see it's got that angle, which is fine. Press the G key once and the G key again, and it puts us into that slide mode. So we can just sort of slide that up into position about like that. Now, I think I'm going to take both of these loops on either side here. I'm going to press the S key and then Y. Let's pull those in just a little bit more. But the next thing that we want to do is take note of the fact that this next polygon down is not a quad. We're trying to primarily work with quads because we are working with subdivision surfaces, and we will have maybe a triangle or two in, but we want to come in now and let's do this. Let's come back in, press the K key, come down to this vertex. We'll come in like that, and then we'll do the same thing. Z key and then C to place that. And then what we find is that we've got a quad, we've got quads. Okay, that's the parameter we want to hit. So let's come down here and take a look at this area, because I would perhaps like to make the distribution a little bit better, but our consideration is the fact that if we take a look at this, let's come over in the front, we have the curvature that begins here. We've got a little bit greater density of polygons, but the consideration is that we go into this buffer zone here and then down into a flat area. And we have a little bit of wiggle room. And this is one of the reasons why up front, I wanted to make sure that I had sufficient resolution, why we went from 8 to 9, and then I added 2 more up to 11. It gave us just a little bit better curvature without really compromising and making it more difficult to match up the resolution of this shaft over here. So what I'll do is come in, and I'm going to come to this edge, which is in a planar region, and we'll do the same thing, G and then G again, and I'm going to pull that down, and we'll do the same thing here, G and G, and we'll pull that down, and then one more here, G, G. It's going to be subtle, and it's not going to compromise the topology too much, G, G, and we'll pull that down, and that's going to allow us to adjust this area just a little bit. So let's come in now, And we need to replicate this work to the other side. We also need to patch up this area because we are working with subdivision surfaces, and we do need to patch up the ngon that currently exists in this area. We're working on this 1/2, and let's go ahead now and start mirroring some of this work, even if it's just sort of temporary. I'm going to remove the subdivision modifier, and we'll add a mirror modifier, and we need it to go along the y-axis. So let's switch over to y. We've already got geometry on the y side, so we need to bisect it. But then we need to tell it to flip which side's being mirrored, like that. We can press this button, the on cage, so that we can see the change interactively while we're in the modeler. Okay, so now let's come over, K key, click here, and then press the Y key to come across to establish sort of that zone. Let's come into vertex mode. It's easier to see. And what I like to do is come in like this. I'm going to use this anchor point, and then I'm just going to come across really quickly, Y key, click, and then we'll just keep doing that. Y key, click, and return, and then we'll just keep doing that. Now this one, I could even come down here and anchor that. It really just depends on what it is that you want to do. Both would work just fine. And then down here, let's come here, click, scroll down, and we can come right to that center point. And then I can continue this loop going right to there to anchor that. And that's we're done. I think I might come to this point, maybe move that up a little bit. So that's all we needed to do to dice that up to make it subdivision worthy. Now we're going to do one more loop coming in once we get the geometry in place that blends the two shapes together, but we're going to tackle that in just a little bit. Let's come over here and apply. Now we can't apply in edit mode, so I'm going to leave edit mode and click apply. So when I come back into edit mode, we can properly see how many edges that we have. I accidentally got this. I'm going to hold the shift key to deselect that. There we go. I've got the readouts over here. So I've got 30 edges. All I did was I came here and then I just turned statistics on and off. That tells me that I've got 30 edges. Well, that's really useful because let's go ahead and hide that circle. We don't need that. We need to rebuild this with 30 edges. So Shift A, come to mesh, come down to circle. We come back to view. Let's make this 1/2 inch because it's huge. We just need to set in exactly 30, and then we can scale with the S key, bring it down to the size of the blue reference line, and there we go. So now the original profile, I don't need. I can turn that off. This is the one that matches. So now we just bring this in. And one thing that I'm not going to do is I could come up here in edit mode, in vertex mode, and I could take these and I could contour them a little bit more closely to this. I'm not going to go to that effort for what we're doing right here. Press the E key and then X to extrude, X twice to extrude that shaft for the eyepiece. Option Z takes us out of X-ray mode. And then Tab key leaves edit mode. We need to join these two pieces of geometry together. So we're going to join. There we go. Tab key takes us into edit mode. And now we just need to create a proper face filled into this region. So F key, and then we just need to isolate. Let's go ahead into face mode. Press the W key to cycle over to selection circle. Hold the shift key, and we're just going to quickly select all of these. Bring up the context menu and dissolve those faces. Shift key selects that. Now let's look at this in the front or the left, any of the views that you happen to want to view it. Bring up the context menu, and then we're going to bridge faces. And there we go. Now the next thing that we need to do is simply come in and let's give it 4 cuts initially, but we need to change it to blend surface. And there we go. Look at that. This is where we can come in to the smoothness. We can adjust that to kind of find the contouring that we want. So look at it at the top also and kind of look at how it is that we're working. And I actually think that looks pretty good. And this is where you could also determine, do you need 4 or maybe 3 cuts? I think actually 3 cuts is going to work because that gets me a little bit closer in terms of the rough size of the polygons that we're already subdividing. Okay, we're almost done, believe it or not. We need to add a couple of boundary loops in. If we take a look at this in the front, along this long shaft, we want it to be flat, and we have curved polygons coming into that. So we need to add a boundary loop about right here. So we're just going to add that right there. And let's come over and just automatically set the crease weight to 1, and that will prevent subdivided polygons from progressing past that boundary. If we look at this from the right, we have the same situation where we need to add some boundary loops around here, because if we look at it from the top, we've got essentially flat polygons along one axis coming this way, but we've got curvature coming in. So if we were to look at just this particular loop, we can see that we've got basically the same kind of condition. We need to add a boundary loop around here to really make sure that that curvature is kind of stopping right there and not sort of loosely following all the way in. So let's follow this from the right side. We have a logical, oh, and I've got 4 edges right here that have creasing set up to 1. We don't want that, so I'm going to reset those back to 0. That's easy. And then press the K key. There's a logical point right here. We can just quickly and loosely, roughly creating the same width polygons all the way down, about like that, and just come down until we get here. And then you can make them look pretty if you want, but we don't need to worry too much about it because this is going to be something that wouldn't show up very strongly. But we have all of these planar polygons. So if we come back in here, let's selection circle, all of these now are planar to each other. And that gives us a lot of flexibility in how it is that we arrange those polygons. So I've terminated the loops in a way that isn't creating perfectly square quads. They don't need to be in this planar region. Okay, so that gives us a lot of flexibility, but we do want to replicate this to the other side. So let's go ahead and just replicate these. Tab key, let's come over and add another mirror modifier just to do that for us. We're replicating along the Y direction, so let's do Y. Okay, let's go ahead and apply that. Tab key takes us back into edit mode. I said that we can have triangles in a subdivided polygon, and it can handle that, but we do have one little area here that I think we could probably optimize just a little bit. We've got this gentle slope coming down, and I think these 2 polygons we could probably optimize out. So I'm going to select this vertex, hold the Shift key and select that one, bring up the context menu and do Merge Vertices at last, and that's what happens. Let's come over here and then press Shift R, and that kind of optimized those out. But as my eye looks at it, I've got an angle here, 2 triangles, that if I remove this edge in the middle, we can dissolve that and have a quad. So this is one thing we look for in polygon meshes, is we look for loops. That's something we always try and do, is maintain these loops. And by removing those couple of triangles, we optimize the mesh without really radically changing the topology much. And I think that works pretty well. Now, the next thing that we need to pay attention to, and the last thing that we need to pay attention to, let's come over here into shading mode. In fact, I've got a material already on there I'm going to turn off. Let's come on and do shade auto smooth. And we need to make sure there's a slight edge that I see right here. And we want to come over and check to make sure that all the polygons have the same facing orientation, and they don't. So tab key, A key, come up to mesh, come down to normals, and then recalculate outside, and that fixes that for us. Okay, so let's come back up here and turn that off. We need to add a subdivision modifier. So let's come over, add subdivision. Let's just set it up to 2 so we can see it nicely. Tab key, and there we go. So we've got this blended, and now I'll be able to finish the model with this centerpiece being subdivided. Let's talk about possibilities for one quick minute. This type of geometry would be really easy to do with NURBS type of modeler. Like I'm sure plasticity, moment of inspiration, Moi 3D is it sometimes called, Rhino. This type of stuff is something you could very easily go in and use with a NURBS modeler. Somebody actually made a comment in one of my videos that said, why don't you just use a NURBS modeler? Well, you could, but if you don't happen to know how to use NURBS modeling, which they can be kind of complex, then you learn to do it in the program that you have available to you. And I also show you all this for the sake of learning how to manipulate geometry and then use it for subdivision surfaces to create geometry like this, right? It's not just about this model, it's about the experience of polygon modeling and subdivision surfaces. So anyway, I hope you found this to be a useful tutorial for figuring out this kind of topology.